Hi everyone, welcome to the Modern Masculine Summit. I've got Warren Scott Holland here with me today. Warren is a professionally trained counsellor who has spent more than 26 years working with young people, adults, families and teams to provide counselling in relationships, marriage and guidance. His anxiety and depression management with addictions, spiritual guidance, stress management and other areas of health and well-being. He also works with trauma-informed care. Warren's had his own path of different addictions during his life, and he's here to talk about his own experiences and how that's helped him to become the man that he is today. So welcome, Warren.
Thank you, Helen. It's wonderful to be here.
Such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
We were introduced through a friend who knew that I was looking for somebody who really knew their stuff. And they put me onto you and sure enough, we had a most unbelievable chat, and I was so impressed and so with you on what we discussed. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that with our audience today. So
thank you.
I'm wondering if you can kind of start at the beginning, really, as to your own journey with addictions and what that really looked like in your life.
Yes. Well, I think I began early on. I remember being very intrigued by my mother, who was a heavy smoker. And for some reason, I just, as a really young child, I decided that I wanted to have a try of that. And I started smoking cigarettes really, really early. And I think the first time I ever had a cigarette was like about 8 years old. And I'm not saying that from then is when my mind decided that I was an addict, but it kind of speaks to the danger of the things that I was interested in. For me, I had my childhood was very difficult. I lived with a chronic alcoholic parent, and she was quite violent, and there was a lot of domestic violence in our family during the early years. So for me, I had this sense as a young boy that still intrigues me today, that there was something not quite right, and I felt like I was trying to survive something as a young boy. And going to school was really difficult. I was quite alone. I grew up with 4 sisters. So I was often, my friends would say, oh, you must be spoiled in that family because there's 4 girls and only one of you. And it's like, well, it was kind of the opposite, because I kind of got lost in that family. I got a bit lost in the dimensions of the family. So it started when I was at school, and I became, in the second year of my high school, which is called year 8, year 8, Form 2 was called then, I was physically abused by one of our school teachers, and it was a kind of the decline of my schooling, and I became less functioning in school and started to fail quite increasingly. And it was at that point that I started to look for other things and to rebel against the teachers, and because at that point I didn't know how to talk about it, I didn't know who to talk to, my family was in turmoil, there was no use discussing anything that was going on within that environment. So I kind of started hanging out with the people that I thought would protect me, and they were the kind of the bully boys and the tougher kind of kids. And that's where we started to go away for lunchtime and, you know, drink a little bit of alcohol at our friends' parents' houses. And I think the difference, what happened for me, was that when I started to drink alcohol, I felt something changed in me, and the effect of the alcohol was quite marked. And whereas my friends were, you know, feeling intoxicated and not really getting into it. So that's kind of where the journey began for me in terms of what I learnt about that feeling that I got when I first took a drug. And through a progression of things, I left school early. I wasn't getting on. I'd lost all the ability to manage the teachers and started to get into trouble. I was still going to school because it was a safe environment for me. It was safer than being at home. And I then decided that I was going to leave school. So I left school and just hung out with friends, and things sort of took apart from there. Cannabis came along. Amphetamines came along, other drugs, you know, like heroin came along as well. So the progression of my addiction from there was a decline, but at some point, for some reason, within my psychology, I could always muster up the desire to go, okay, well, look, things aren't going so well. I think I better go and get a job. And I was able to then fit back in, get a job, do okay, get some money together, find somewhere to live, and things would start to progress a little bit. But I never had that sense in me that I could break out of any sort of addiction. So there was always like, I'd just drink alcohol, take it easy for a while, and then move on to something else. And so yeah, those years, it took me 20 years of doing that, doing okay, not doing so well, picking up drugs again. But I think a career of about 20 years of addiction led me to a point where I was, like, without people in my life, I decided that I couldn't get out of this situation, and I had no way of finding help. I was in turmoil. I'd pushed all my friends away. I'd pushed my wife away, and I was totally left on my own with no human help available, really. And that's when I was directed to treatment by a family friend. And from that point, I guess the story changes, but it's hard to get into an hour and try to pinpoint the parts that are relevant.
So when it's interesting to me that there's this journey that you seem to be high functioning almost within it. And
yes, to some degree, I've done a lot of work on this, and it's a philosophy that I've sort of tapped into, and I believe is that one of the things that I think a lot of men are stuck with is that you get to a point in life where you start to look back at all of these sticky notes through our lives, and because of the turmoil of the kind of family that I lived with, it was so toxic and dysfunctional, and there was abuse and violence and poverty. My father was a migrant, and he didn't do so well. He had a very low paying trade. There were 6 children in our family, and it was an environment where I felt that for some reason all along that journey I felt like I had some kind of intelligence, but I wasn't in a position where I felt, because of my self-esteem, that I could really do anything about it in terms of breaking out and becoming what I really wanted to be. Because during my early years, the things that I wanted to be either were taken away from me or I wasn't able to achieve them. And one of the first things that happened was I was getting in trouble with the law, and they sent me to a child's, what's called the Sea Cadets, like a group for young boys to try and straighten them out and something to do. And that actually worked quite well. But what it led to was that I then decided I wanted to be in the Navy. And it didn't work out because during the testing I found out that I was colourblind. And it's from that point on they said, well, you can't be in the Navy. I was like, well, I'm a high functioning cadet. I'm one of the best cadets in the unit. I've passed all of the communication things. I can do the flags. I was a marksman. And they said, no, you can't do it. So it was a really difficult time to have that taken away. So I do believe that there is a level of intelligence, whether it's mine or whether it comes from my ancestors, that comes with me. But for some reason, I was always to break out of that poverty and go and get myself a job. I still am quite amazed that, and I think that's the difference between getting to the point in life where you make the decision that you're going to do something about your life, and whatever it takes to get to that, to get people to that point, is what I've learned is usually the breakthrough in development.
I think you can certainly claim your own intelligence, Warren. I think you should allow that. It's interesting, isn't it? The path that we take, and obviously it's a strategy, isn't it? It's a strategy for panic, for stress, for anxiety, for all of the things that we don't want to face. It's a numbing mechanism. I was talking to Henry about this earlier, that, it's just, I don't want to feel any of this, boom, boom, whatever it is, to kind of stop that in its tracks.
Yeah, but I think at the time with like if I reflect on that, at the time I wasn't aware of that. I don't have any awareness of that. Like it's not
Of
there.
course.
It's just like a tranquilized, paralyzed life. And I remember an old therapist in addiction, Ernie Larson, said that, you know, what we learn in our childhood, we then go and practice it.
Mm.
Yeah, and then when we start practicing what we do, we get good at it. And then once we get good at something, we become that thing. And then what you become has consequences. And for me, with an addiction, that is such a relevant step of what happened in my life, because I didn't learn good things when I was young. I learned to be isolated. I learned to be vigilant. I learned to protect myself because the family wasn't going to do that. I learned that my parents were toxic and there was no love in there. So when I went into my own life, I started to practice that. I was isolated. No one was going to love me. And if they came near me, they would find me very unlovable. Yeah. I've never really been in a violent sense, that type of man. I've been very withdrawn and vigilant. So yeah, I think there's that sense that what my past is, I don't want that to bleed into the future or into the present.
It's so interesting talking to different people about their experience with addictions, because this is what's so beautiful about having these conversations, is that everybody's experience is quite different. And of course, it's relevant to the life that they've had and relevant to then their portrayal of that addiction as they play it. And
yes,
the person has got such a unique story that's so relevant for people to be able to identify to different levels of story.
I think that's crucial in my experience as a counsellor, and on the other side of that coin is that the experiences of my life, I've learned through doing lots of personal development and spiritual guidance that all of those pieces are the building blocks of who I am today. But I had to be able to do all of those things to claim those steps in my journey, because I can't change them. And that's what ACT predominantly tells us about, is that language is something that we learn, but you can't go back and delete those things. We can try, you know, some types of therapy say that we can. We could try to erase that memory, but it's not possible. You know, those words and those experiences are still there, and I get to claim them, and they are everything that I am today, makes those things. But when I talk to people that I work with, it's crucial that I'm not sitting in a place of thinking I understand how that person's got to where they are, sitting in that seat across from me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, so it's something that I learned off Russ Harris, who's a ACT therapist that I did some work with. And he always said, you just need to hold that stuff really lightly, Warren. It's just, you know, it's like holding things in your hands rather than clasping onto it. Because in addiction, you clasp onto life really, really hard, which is a paradox, because for most of the time, it's like you're trying to kill yourself.
Yeah, it's like it's falling through your fingers.
Yeah. So I'm very aware that when I work with other people, that my journey is nothing like their journey. So my job is to try and find some leverage in their story to put in the influence. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because as caring people, often when you're dealing with somebody, you want to be able to go, oh yeah, I know what you mean, and you put them at ease, and
yes,
but you have to really hold yourself in like a solidarity with them, but give them their own sovereignty, that they have their own experience, and you're not going to take anything away from that.
Yes.
So that then they can really speak about their experience without feeling like, oh, it wasn't like yours, or I've done it wrong. And I think it's really important to allow people to speak about who they are, because everything we're saying is about, once you really own who you are and your own experiences, because you can't get rid of it, then that is really the recovery, is it? Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and in terms of being a helper, it's important as well. It's really crucial as a helper that you can separate yourself enough so that you can be in a place of influence, rather than be on the side of the people that are being directive or punitive, or like you say, you can't tell them what to do, or you can't sit in a place of understanding, because unless you've been in that exact moment, nothing seems the same. And that type of person with any type of addiction is likely to strike back or shut down in that moment when you start to say, oh yeah, I get it, I know what you mean. And then you start talking about yourself, which is what you don't want to do.
It's funny, it's coming from non-judgment and compassion rather than, oh yeah, I know because, and
Yes.
overwhelming them with what you did, and therefore kind of putting in shadow their own experiences.
Yes.
So tell me, we were going to talk about your skills around anxiety and stress management, because obviously as you've moved through your different addictions and into the place where you really took claim to that, you have become the expert really in managing all of those feelings that may cause people to turn to drugs and alcohol and porn addiction or other things that are helping them to just lay under the surface. So
yes.
Tell me about some of the work that you do and some of the things that you know to be true about stress and anxiety.
Well, the first thing to know about stress is that it's normal in some degree. We need levels of stress in our lives to tell us that we're tired, or that we need to take a break, or we need anxiety in our life to tell us that things aren't good for us, or that there's something to be worried about. And one of the things with our addicted people or working with trauma is that everything becomes dangerous. So hypervigilance triggers the chemicals in the body that respond to stress and anxiety, which when present in the body are not healthy. They're counterproductive if we continuously have them. So working with stress and anxiety, what ACT tells us is that we need to start to notice. And the sooner we can notice what's going on internally, is we can start to understand it, or start to notice that, oh, I'm feeling anxious. So what am I feeling anxious about? What can I do in the present moment to relieve that anxiety? Whether it's start taking breaths or to pull back from the situation. But the thoughts are in our mind constantly. Our minds are like a computer. They're just words, words, words. It's always making stories about things.
Yeah.
And every happy day might be interrupted by one thought that changes everything. So the first thing that we would ask people to do is to start to notice when anxiety is triggered and when they're starting to feel depressed or anxious.
So when you talk about ACT, just tell everybody who's listening, explain ACT and what that actually is as a concept.
ACT is it's a cognitive behavioural therapy, but it's more the third wave of cognitive therapies that are second from CBT. So CBT is a therapy that tells us, when we have a thought, we can change our thought, which in the long run will change our behaviours, which changes the consequences of what happens in our life. It's the most widely used therapy. However, what we find with addiction is that when someone's thinking about using, or someone's feeling stressed or anxious about something that is really, really present in their life, the thought is not likely to go away. As I was talking about before, we can't delete our thoughts. They're still there. That's always present in our mind. We just might not have access to them all the time. So the thought comes up that I think I need to have a drug, or I'm feeling like I need to use. And the thought in many addicts' minds is that the craving starts to play havoc in their mind. Now, when people start to say things like, I should change that thought, it doesn't go away. So what they're doing now is putting more stress and more anxiety into their mind and into their body to push this thought away. Does that make sense? So I've got to push it away, push. So internally I'm straining and I'm pushing and I don't want it. And then at some point you get tired and then you pull it in close. And that's when they start to use. So one of the things we have to get people to do is notice that it's happening, and then choose through the work we do to use a diffusion strategy or to do something that's more valued. Because that's the beginning of the therapy.
Yeah, amazing. To actually, it's I would call it owning it. You have to almost
Yes.
own your
Yes.
own emotions. So it's kind of like, it's okay to own that,
Yes.
second that you can own that as, this is something that's happening within me. I'm allowed to feel it. It's okay.
Yes.
Now what am I going to do with it? Because it feels horrible.
That's right. Yeah. So the opposite of that is true for when we're in the early stages of recovery. There's no defense against what's coming next. So people need to unpack that through whatever strategy they're using to build their recovery, to find out the things that they're fused with in their mind or their emotions. So if I'm fused with things like my life sucks, or nobody loves me, or my wife's left me, or I've lost my job and I'm hopeless, I'm just an addict, then all those things, all that's doing is pulling it in closer. So that means I'm fused with that content that I'm living my life with. So the work that people have to do from there on is to learn how to diffuse from that. So the thought comes in, I want to use, notice that I'm thinking about that. Okay, for today I'm in recovery and I'm not going to do that. So I'm choosing my valued action and I'm doing a committed action towards that. The thought's still there, it hasn't gone anywhere, but I'm not putting the extra stress and anxiety into that situation.
Now, as we are at the moment with COVID, our lives have completely changed in the past month to 6 weeks. So what do you think will be happening, especially, obviously, the summit is looking at how men are feeling in this time. What are some of the anxieties and stresses that men are going to be going through right now?
It would depend on many factors, whether they've got their job still or whether they've lost their job. That would be difficult for any person losing their job in this current environment. There's all of those life sort of values that I should be working, or I've got to make money, or where's the next dollar going to come from? How am I going to provide? How am I keeping my wheels spinning? And all of those things will start to attack people's values in terms of how they feel about themselves. And they're probably becoming more lethargic, more feelings of depression, lacking energy, motivation to do the things that they normally do. I mean, even speaking in my own experience, I work from home at the moment most of the day, and I just get up in the morning, and the distance between where I get out of bed and my office is about 10 meters. So there's not much in a life value journey between those 2 points. Whereas previously I'd get up, get myself ready, have my breakfast, go for a drive, through the coffee thing, talk to the person there, engage with people, missing all of that valued connection. So there's a bit of sadness there as well.
Yeah, and the dynamic in the family, because of course we've got, in some areas we've got the children doing their own version of that, partners are doing their own version of that, and then so there's this dynamic playing out, isn't there, that
yes,
there's an anxiety then about showing up in the house as somebody to hold the space to guide this family through this nightmare.
Yep.
When they're not feeling great themselves.
Well, I think I'd say the world's a different place now for that type of relationship, in that it would be quite normal for both partners to be fairly functional in their life, and that's the way I would imagine things are going. So there's less for that person to actually do, but there's also probably difficulties in trying to move around the place and bumping into each other, because they're probably not used to spending 24 hours a day together. So, it's like, who's doing this, or are you doing it right? So there's quite likely to be little niggles that are building up, with a bit of pressure building into the family as well around all of those relationships staying bonded quite fiercely without any sort of interior ability to say, I'm going to go out for a bit of a walk now. So everything seems to be pressured by, am I doing the right thing, or is it the wrong thing? So that can create anxiety as well.
And the thing about an anxiety or a stress is that you shoot out at the person closest to you. So,
Yes.
where we can kind of hold it when we're in a business meeting, or we can discuss it in a very empathetic way with a friend, or, we kind of, oh yeah, I'm good, it's no problem, actually honest about it. But the person that you share most of the time with, well, there's two scenarios. There's the person who lives alone and is trying to just carry it all personally, and then the person who lives with somebody, and there's this kind of niggling because they're both a bit over it, and the availability to discuss at that level has never really been present in their lives before.
No, that's a very good point.
Yeah. How do they
Oh,
start to kind of communicate anxiety, and how do they then manage that between these relationships?
well, that's an interesting thing that we do in relationship counselling is unpacking all of those things that people get to where there's lots of niggles, there's lots of things that are not going well, they're not relating to each other, they've lost all of the key areas of relationships, and they're only really hanging on to probably one of them. And it's about how do you teach them some good rules, or guide them into building their own set of strategies to start to come back together, to have those kind of conversations, to be open to saying, look, I'm not okay with what's happening. This is not how I want things to be, and then learning to not be triggered by that and feeling like it's an attack, and having conversations that go through to the end, if you so to speak.
Because it happens in the brain as well, doesn't it? There's all the different stress hormones and all the different kind of like activations where
Yes.
there's the freeze, flight,
Yep.
fight. So how could we manage if something's going on and it's actually triggered something in the brain and it's coursing through your veins, so to speak? Can you tell us a couple of strategies that people might be able to influence that?
There's grounding is a good technique. Or take, like, if you're in an argument, or if you're engaged with someone else, the most simple strategy is to stop, to notice whatever it is you do. Like, you can use kind of neuroadaptive type strategies to pull yourself up, extract yourself from the situation, particularly in an argument, saying, look, I need to take a break, but I'm going to come back to this. So, and the most important thing to do is to breathe, because oxygen reverses all of those chemicals that you're talking about in the brain. So when we start to become panicked or anxious or angered, those chemicals, the cortisol, the hormones, the adrenalines, they all start to push out to the external parts of our body to prepare that fight-flight response. So for some, it might be that they get rigid, their arms and legs are ready to run or fight. So there's a lot of rigidity in there. So when we notice, pull ourselves into that space, take a breath, step away, and breathe for 10 deep breaths is the old classic, but it actually works. But the thing about breathing is it must be noticed. So it's a really noticeable, and really committing to that point. When we're in a highly anxious state, or highly argumentative or aggressive, into an anger state, we're often full of air and really stiff, and talking with my breath while it's like this, and my ribs aren't moving, my lungs, and I'm still holding my breath, but I'm not taking any breath in. Take another breath, and I'm just expanding what's already expanded. Okay.
The phrase puffing your chest out.
Yeah, so it's like, and I can do that 3 or 4 times without taking a breath, which I haven't done for the last 45 seconds. Take another breath. Angry, 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 angry. And then when someone says breathe, or I get to that space, I go, it takes a lot of exhaling to get back to the base state. And
That's
then we
amazing.
start to breathe. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So, and it's the same with an emotional state. You'll notice when people are crying or they're emotional, they'll be just sucking in oxygen, but not releasing the toxic part of the breath. So while that's in your brain, while that's in your body, the brain's not giving you the good stuff you need. So in most cases, the simplest thing you can do is to notice where your body's at and reverse it. Does that make sense? That's kind of where we're at with. And from there, you can do other things like If you're on your own and you're in an anxious state and you're out in public, you're in a park or you're walking around, it's the same thing, but it might be coming into contact with your body. So it might be that you're listening to things that are happening around you, and you try and pick out 5 separate sounds whilst you're breathing, or you look and see 5 different things. Push your feet into the ground and feel your feet on the ground. Breathing, noticing, labeling emotions as they come up. So there's some grounding techniques which actually help to diffuse from where you get to in an anxious state.
And it's a place of safety, isn't it, when you go to the breath?
Yes.
Because you know, when we're anxious and stressed, we're not safe, are we?
No, that's why we're like that, because biologically we're programmed to trigger to any situations where there's a danger or a threat to our lives. And you know, way back in the echelons of time, we'd have to run from saber-toothed tigers or elephants. It was appropriate that, oh, I have to get out of here. But now we can be triggered by anything. You know, it's a bad word on Facebook or something. Oh my God, you know, and that triggers people as well. But it's a continual hyper attack on the senses constantly. So people are traveling with a high baseline a lot of the time. So learning these strategies and practicing them daily can help to gradually lower your base rate, which then gives you a further way to get before you start to get angry or stressed.
I know I'll often say, where are your shoulders? Because,
yes.
you know, and so if people don't even know what I mean when I say breathe, I will get, where are your shoulders? And they go, oh, and people don't even realize they're going like this.
Yes.
And
so that's a really good, that's a fabulous cue, and it speaks to essentially what it's about is about us noticing, because as humans are like that, we can notice the things that are going on in other people. So it's noticing that, where am I when I'm in that moment? I have to check in with myself.
Yeah.
That's why the benefits of the other side of mindfulness is doing those practices on a continual basis, like regularly checking in with those things. Because most people, when they come into a recovery state, when I ask them, I'll say to them, can you write down on a piece of paper 10 emotions that you regularly travel with and yet you are aware that you travel with? And there's not a lot of people that can actually write down 10 of those emotions. So when I'm working with a person in that state, there's only 3 or 4 places they can go: sadness, anger, bit of happiness, and depression. Like, that's not a big choice. So everything that gets lumped into those 4 categories might not necessarily be those feelings. So part of ACT therapy is to actually start to, when we diffuse things that are happening, we can start to label it. And you go, oh, so you're noticing that something's happening. What's that feeling? Oh, I think it's sadness. Okay, sadness. So it's kind of like internally I'm labeling, this is what sadness feels like. Next time it comes up, I go, oh, this is sadness. So it's a continual process of getting better at our list of emotions.
And we have to understand, as adults, we have to be kind of humble enough to know that we don't know anything.
Correct. Yeah, like telling someone they're ignorant, they get a bit upset. You go, no, what does the word mean? It just means a lack of awareness of a particular thing. Oh, okay. So that's not so that's the context again for ACT, is words are really important. And words have a meaning, but there's a continuum. So sadness, when I ask, is that a bad emotion or a good emotion? A lot of people say it's bad. Happiness, is that a good one? Yeah, that's good. Courage, good or bad? You know, there's a list of standard ones that we'll put out to people, and often they'll just label them either good or bad. So it's understanding that it is what it is. It's neither good nor bad, but it's a human experience.
So when you're dealing with men, what are your thoughts that they're dealing with as far as coming with the masculine ego in order to actually come into these points of allowing themselves to learn about emotions, when every bit of training that most men seem, I mean, I'm talking to lots of men all the time, and there's a very similar pathway of, I wasn't allowed to talk about that. I wasn't taught how to talk about that. I didn't even know what that feeling was. I had no idea that I was angry, you know?
Yes.
So then when they come to dealing with that, they are feeling that there's a resistance to then being vulnerable and acknowledging that, yeah, I don't know anything about this because I'm supposed to know everything because I'm the hero.
That's right. So that's why I'm saying, like, I would make ignorance okay and just say, okay, well, would you be willing to learn? So it's always having that loose sense of, I learned a skill of telling people or suggesting something to someone, but saying it in a nice way. So it's like, rather than saying, you know, if you don't stop using drugs, you're going to die. So rather than making the statement, have you ever considered using drugs for the rest of you know, for the next 10 years might not be good for your health and that you might actually die? So it's the same thing, but it's presented in a different way where the person can consider that as a question rather than being told. Because when people get told, that's not how it is, I'm too smart for that. But I think in terms of the system, I get referrals a lot for men for anger management. And I say to the people that refer them, so am I teaching him that his expression of anger he needs to manage? Because that would just mean he needs to fight better. That's, you know, so, but anger management for me is more about emotional management. Because if I can teach people or show them ways to manage their emotions better, then there's less anger. But it's not about the anger. I'm not teaching you about anger. So men are often, like you say, they fall into line easy. I think we're programmed in a way to do that, to be protective and to be brave and all of those kinds of things. Men that come in and are vulnerable are very frightened of that. It's like, I haven't told anybody this, or I don't talk to my friends like this, and I'll be like, well, maybe you could do more of that. What's to lose? You know, what would be the worst thing that happened if you were to do that?
And what do you think that they feel is the worst thing that could happen from doing that?
Well, their friends would ridicule them.
Yeah.
Well, they'd lose their respect in someone's eyes. But how does that relate to a person that's on their own? So it's their own concept of who they are. So often it's we're our own worst enemy in terms of who we represent, that we think we are. We talk about that in ACT as like a self as context, is that pure awareness of who we are as a person. Is our life changes and we're in different places through our journey, but the part of us that's inside there is the same part that's always been there. So it's the internal us doesn't really change a lot, but what happens on the outside does. The experiences, all of those things. It's kind of like if you're the driver and you change your car every 2 years. It's the same driver, different car. So there's a sense of pure awareness of us in context of our life. And that's kind of like all theories. It's a journey to enlightenment. But the sooner we can get people to an understanding of that, the better the recovery usually is.
But that's an amazing way of looking at it. Same driver, new car.
Yes. Yeah. But you can't project onto that what the driver might look, because in this awareness, I don't know whether you meditate, but I think we were talking about it earlier that you do, but in this context is teaching, you know, men or people that are resistant to meditation. So, I don't want to do that. You know, my mind's always busy. I can never shut it down. It seems pointless. It's a bit, you know, weird. And the concept of meditation is it's not to make your mind empty, because you can't do that. What it's about is disconnecting from what's going on in it and letting it happen. So it's kind of like watching the cars on the highway rather than running around trying to dodge the cars on the highway.
Yeah. I find meditation is an amazing kind of tool to constantly use to stay level.
Yes.
I think it can be quite torturous when you're really, really struggling.
Yes.
But to kind of as a meditative kind of practice daily, to just kind of, like you said, with that amazing information before, the breath and the grounding, it does kind of just keep bringing you back and bringing you back. And I think it would help people to start to be able to do the recognition that you're talking about, to really be in awareness.
Yeah. Well, recovery from any chronic addiction really, it's counterintuitive in that there's a sense of it being in a hurry to have it happen. From my experience and the experience of the people that I've learned from, is that the first stage of recovery is really just about containing the thing that you're addicted to. So really keeping your mind away from that, like keeping the life away from it and not doing it anymore. So the abstinence part. And our focus really needs to be building a resistance to that and a defense against it. So the deep work really needs to happen probably no less than 12 months after that. If a person can get a good grounding on how to live their life a day at a time without being affected by the substance, but still having the thoughts, but learning a defense against them. And then later on, when other things come back, is like getting our relationships back or getting work back on track, getting our education back on track, and all of those things that build the character into the recovery, that's when you start to do the deep work and start to work on your trauma and all of your history, and so that you can learn not to bleed into the current from your past. Yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times,
isn't it?
Well, a lot of recoveries it's about like trying to make it happen quicker. It doesn't happen in any sense in any human journey where we try to make ourselves more aware or more enlightened. There's no quick journey for that.
I have a thing on my dashboard of my car, and it said, it doesn't matter how long it takes, the time's going to pass anyway.
That's correct. And usually if we're taking our time and being more aware, it seems to take less time than when you're pressured by it. Oh God, I'm going to be late. Take a breath. I'm usually on time, and I do it. I still have difficulties with that. I have a thing about when I'm going to be late, and I click in and I go, it's okay. In my life, I'm very rarely late. Okay, thanks for that. Get on with my day, have a few breaths. But when I'm busy and I've got a lot to do and there's all that stuff rolling up behind me, it's kind of like it's pushing me into this hastiness. The world's quite like that. But now we've got this moment to take a breath, really, don't we? In some ways.
And this is it's like a paradox, isn't it? We've got this moment to take a breath, but on another level, it's pushing people into self-development plus that they've been avoiding for years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, facing things on speed, and people don't necessarily have the tools to do that.
No, they don't. And that's why I'm saying is that's why I believe that you must prepare the vessel for the journey. Yeah, you don't take a rickety ship out to sea to undertake a very difficult journey. So you must prepare yourself for that journey. So that whatever's going, like we talk about it in ACT, if you have an addiction, you've often got a lot of dishonesty and a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And we imagine that it's all in a bit of a box. And all these things are what we call the private experience. And they're all in this box. And depending on how your addiction is, it's a really big box. You might have to carry it around, not really, but metaphorically. And when you get into recovery, it's like you want the box to be emptied. I want people to forgive me and I want all those things to be better, but that can't happen right now. You have to get ready to make that happen. And as you get better at it, you start to unpack your box and it gets a little smaller and it gets a little easier to manage. And over time, you're left with, metaphorically, a little box that you've got that's got all your secrets in it, and you're okay with that. And you can just hold that in your pocket or put it in your pocket, and every now and then it comes out and goes, oh, remember that? Oh, yeah, okay, that's cool. Thank you for that. So that's kind of what the journey is about unpacking the box and knowing that what's in the box doesn't frighten me, or I'm not afraid of it. So the monster can't scare me anymore.
What great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is that, what I love about what you're saying is that kind of the compassion approach for yourself, that like, I can't do it all now, but if I'm doing this tiny step at a time, that's the best I can do right now.
Yes.
Mm.
And that the fear with the trauma work is, when you use the trauma-informed approach to that in recovery, is that if I'm not met by the person that understands that concept, it can make things worse. So I need someone that's going to not, hey, let's look at your box and tip it all out on the table. Let's check it out and let's have a look at all the things in your box. If I'm not ready for that, that's just going to cause me more trauma. And when I'm traumatized and when I'm stressed and anxious and I'm not in recovery, the first thing I'm going to do is go and do what I don't need to do. So I'm going to go straight home because I'm stressed and traumatized, and use a drug or jump online and do some porn. All those things will start to happen. So it's like, I want someone that's in my recovery that respects that I've got this box and here it is, and I can sit it on the desk when you're talking to me. And if I feel like I want to pull something out of that box and show it to you, then I'm going to do that. But it's not my job to pull the box open and go, let's have a look at this, as a therapist. Yeah?
Yeah.
So
and I also think there's an important point to make, that not everybody deserves your truth. Not
that's
everybody
right.
deserves it. There's this big push to have these emotions and be out with them, but only to people who deserve to see that part of you.
Yeah. And if I would suggest to people that are listening is, if you don't like the person you went to see, try another one. But don't make that a reason not to do it, as not a valued action. If it's a valued choice, then rapport is, when we talk counselling and therapy, rapport is the most important thing. So if you don't get rapport and it hasn't happened and you've tried a couple of sessions, then okay, let's try another one. And I really suggest that highly to people, is that if you don't feel safe in the environment, then it's not the right place to be. But sometimes the mind's saying, oh, this is how I have to do it. It's got to be hard because it's like going through withdrawal. If it's not hard, it's not real. That's not the truth. So, be inventive and look for people that are willing to hold your trust with respect and to be careful of what's in your box.
Yeah, because when you start to reach out as well, there's this kind of thing that if you're not received properly, it can shut the whole thing and tape it up. Can't
Absolutely.
It?
Yeah, and then, or it adds to the box and you have to go and get a bigger one. Then the worst thing is, then you're like, I'm not going to therapy because therapy sucks. And a lot of people are like that. Oh, I went to there and they just wanted this and they never, people are therapeutically curious. They want, in your mind, you hear something when someone's sharing and it's like, oh, that's interesting. And I have to be careful that I'm not triggered by that because it's not my business. And that takes me off track. So someone tells me a story and I'm thinking, oh, I want to know more about that. So there's a fine line between what you question and how you question when you're in that space. It's not about what I want to know because I'm curious to find out more details. They might tell me a story that I'm intrigued by. Yeah, so.
And people are coming, not everybody, but everybody's coming from their own place, but they've got their own lens of how they see things. So it's impossible to understand or know how anything's going to land on anybody who's not you, because everything is interpreted to the receiver.
Yes. Stephen Covey's got a bit in one of his 7 habits for highly effective people where he talks about the lens, and he does a demonstration with a pair of glasses where he gets a person out of the audience to put his glasses on and ask them what they can see. And they say, well, it's all blurry. And he's like, well, try harder. You must be doing something wrong. You're not getting it. He said, no, I can't see. They're not working. He said, no, they work fine for me. What are you doing wrong? It's just a fabulous bit in terms of how my therapeutic approach might not fit the person I'm working with if I'm being very punitive and straightforward to that point and not letting their experience guide me in how to help them.
Yeah. So we're going to have to close soon. I think we've got about 5 or 10 minutes to kind of come up with some Warren nuggets for our fabulous audience. So
Yes.
I really appreciate everything that you've said and shared, from your personal experience then to that journey of becoming such a, obviously you're an amazing therapist, and to be able to understand and have the empathy for people that are coming to you. So based on your experience and knowing that we're heading at this transmission's really for mainly a male audience, or for people who are wanting to help and support men in difficulty, what's some things that you could put forward?
I think one of the deepest things that I struggle with, not so much struggle with, but it's like a sense of regret that I compassionately want to or empathically share, is that today in this modern era, there's a great amount of great men out there that you can listen to that will give you inspiration and concepts and thoughts that could change your life, that could make you more aware of the things that myself, when I was young, wasn't taught. So that's the biggest journey in my life at this stage of my age, is that I have to be careful that I don't get, I wish I had known that when I was this young, and I don't want to sink into the sadness and regret of that. So that's what I share, is like guys like Jordan Peterson. There's so many people out there that you can listen to. Even Joe Rogan, he's just a different kind of cat that has some really good inspirational talks on. Many of the men that are on this summit are just fabulous people to guide. I've been guided by many strong men. Even guys like Anthony Robbins was a great person for my development. I went through some of his stuff. And there's so many fabulous men out there that can teach us ways to be better men earlier, sooner, and the sooner you get it, the better. But when you get it, hold it and be really responsive to it. Even some of the best comedians out there can bring some levity to that as well. And the two things that I really admire, and my personal kind of mantras are: success leaves clues, and the universe rewards action.
Love them. Go deeper into those. I like them.
Do you have time for that?
Yep, we do. I think how long we've got? We've got probably about another 5 minutes.
Oh, success leaves clues, which is from an Anthony Robbins reference, is that when I try to do things on my own, it doesn't work, because I'm using, like Einstein says, if you use the same thinking to do your experiment, you're going to get the same result. So my thinking doesn't work when I'm not well. So I need to find another way, and I need to change my thinking so that my actions are different. So it is cognitive in that sense. So when I want to do that, I can see someone else has been down that road. This is where the clues are. So I follow along that journey of someone else that's already done it. So rather than trying to invent the wheel myself, the clues are there. I need to follow them. And people are very successful when they follow a pathway that's already well trudged.
Without comparing that they should have done it before, or that they should.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You need to hold all that regret in your box, in your experience.
Yeah.
Because that will, in a diffused way or in a fused way, go, what's the point? Oh, I'm never going to get it. I'm going to fail. That's why we need to reward action. The universe rewards action. No matter what we do, if we take the action, the smallest step for the people that are depressed, that's one of the biggest journeys for them, is I'm not willing to take any action. Who cares? What's the point? So it's the smallest action in the smallest moment towards that success is success. It's guaranteed in a sense. Many theories will tell you there's a guarantee that you'll get well if you do what we've done. Yeah. So when people ring me up and say, what's the best rehab to go to, or what's the best theory that I should do? And I'll say, well, the best theory is the one you do fully and commit to. Will it work? Yes, it will.
Yeah. And that looks different for everybody, doesn't it?
It does, but I don't know which one it is, but the one that you do is the one that will work. If you're only half-assed at it, it's not going to work. So the universe rewards action. Yeah.
And we need to then apply all the strategies that you're talking about, the breath, the meditation, the grounding, to stop the head putting you off the path.
Yes. Well, the breath is simple, isn't it? It's our biggest asset. It goes to every cell in our body, and to our soul as well, if you believe in that concept. So it's something we just need to be more connected to. And by doing it, you actually connect to the experience around you.
Do you think that we almost have to expect that our mind's going to try and put us off?
That's ACT in a nutshell, actually. That's ACT in a nutshell, is that the best day of your life can be interrupted by 1 second of thinking, and you go, oh my God, you know, I remember the day my father died for some reason, and you sink into sadness. But if we notice that and we know that feeling, we know what grief feels like, we can ponder on it, and we don't get caught up in the fact that happiness is something that we can achieve ongoing. It's like Dr. Russ Harris's book, The Happiness Trap, is a fabulous little read if you're interested in getting onto ACT therapy. That's a really quaint way of learning what it's about. Because we just caught up in the idea that we all should be happy. But happy is one of our list of 10. And when I do that list, not many people put happy on it.
And when we pursue happiness to that regard, it actually creates desperate unhappiness because it seems elusive. Yeah,
because then the imperfections are what get you. So, well, I'm a perfectionist. And they go, well, what's wrong with this picture? Oh, there's a fault in it. Well, you're not a perfectionist, really. You're an imperfectionist.
Yeah, very, very true.
Because you're looking for faults in everything.
Yeah.
Because you know what it's like when you're perfectly dancing. When you're doing something 100%, you don't think about what's going on around you. You're just in there. You're like dancing 100%. You're not thinking about what moves you're doing. You know, you're not looking silly on the dance floor. So 99% is not cool. 100% is, you know, there's no thought.
It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, Warren. Really, really fantastic information and grounded information, which from experience and from learning and from years of actually, you know, putting this into practice. So much admiration for that.
Thank you.
We're going to be having you in our panel coming up next. We're doing live question and answers. I'd ask you all to stick with us and come and visit Henry and Warren. You can ask them questions about their interviews today. And also Wolfgang will be with us, and Kenny and Alan. So we've got a really beautiful panel of people to answer all ends of questions. All questions that go into the question and answer box are actually anonymous, and we can answer them as they come up. So we've got an hour of open questioning coming up. So thank you very much.
Thanks all. See you on the panel.
Cheers, Warren.